Oh boy.
When I wake up each day, I feel so weary. Try to face the world, but it's so dreary. But I found that special thing that makes me cheery. Time to do music theory. Music theory.
You're watching Adventures in Music Theory with your host, Dr. Robbins. So happy Cinco de Mayo to you. And I realize it's probably not Cinco de Mayo to you. It's probably Cinco de Mayo plus uno, but it's Cinco de Mayo when I'm recording this. But it's still a happy time for you because this is the last theory class you have of this semester. You've made it through, so hooray. All we have to do is get you through that exam next week. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Although, before we do that, I have a couple of items I'd like to take care of. One is that you might have received an email from the institutional research people asking you to fill out your course evaluations. I would just like to echo that. Please fill out your course evaluations, not just for my class, but for all your classes and your lessons. It's especially useful because the more people we hear from, the better we have a picture of what's going on with our classes. And also in a semester like this where we found ourselves teaching in a way we hadn't taught before or hadn't expected to be teaching, and where you all found yourselves learning in a way you hadn't expected to be learning, it's really useful for us to know what your impressions are. So please fill that out. And remember, it is anonymous, and I'll look forward to reading your comments. And the other thing to remember before we talk about the exam is homework. The last day for homework for this class is Thursday, May 7th. So by the end of the day, Thursday, I need all your homework. The college says we're not supposed to take up any assignments after the last day of classes, so that's when it needs to be handed in. But do remember also that last week I told you that if you have homework assignments that I assigned since we went off campus and took the class online, you don't have to hand those assignments in. You can consider them optional. And if you haven't handed those in, they won't count against your grade. That's the last 8 assignments I made, I believe. So I don't want those hanging over your head if you're worried about them. But remember, if you have any homework you do intend on turning in, it has to get to me no later than the end of the day on Thursday. After that, I'm not going to bother grading it. And now let's talk about the exam. And today will be a brief session because there's not a lot to talk about. I told you all on Monday that I was going to devote today's session to the exam and ask for you to send me questions you might have that you wanted to address about the exam, and I received no questions. So I'm assuming that means you've had the most fantastic of theory instruction this year, and you've learned from the most wonderful of theory textbooks, and maybe you've also done a good job of getting your work done. But nobody asked me any actual music questions. I got one question about the exam, and it was a very good question. It was, so when is the darn thing? And that's a good question to ask, and I will answer it. I'll tell you exactly when the darn thing is. I'm sure that we had an exam time that was assigned for our class, but I've forgotten it, and it doesn't make any sense to use that exam time since we're not all observing class at the same time every day. So I've decided I'm going to have a self-scheduled exam for y'all this year. And next week is exam week, so the exam is sometime next week. Exams start Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I believe, maybe 9 o'clock, but I'm going to say 8 o'clock. And they end at 6:30 Thursday. So you can choose to take the exam anytime from 8 o'clock next Monday to 3:30 next Thursday afternoon. And here's how things are going to work. Since you know your schedule and know when is a good time for you to take the exam, figure that out. And once you've decided when you want to take the exam, send me an email and let me know when you want to take it. And you can send that email as soon as today or tomorrow if you want. It doesn't have to come immediately, but do send it to me early enough in advance to where I've got some time. Don't send it to me at 9:30 in the morning on Tuesday and say I want to take my exam at 10 o'clock this morning. I may not get it to you in time. I might not be around my computer. So give me advance notice. But you send me an email letting me know when you want to take the exam, and when you do, I will email a copy of the exam to you. I'm not going to put it on Moodle or Google Classroom. I want you to let me know when you want the exam, and I'll send it to you when you're ready to take it. Once you receive it from me, you have 24 hours to get it back to me. It's not going to take you 24 hours to take the exam. Don't worry. It won't take, it won't take a full 3 hours, which is the amount of time we would have allocated for it if we were doing the exams in the classrooms. But you've got 24 hours from the time I send it to you to get it back to me. Don't spend more than 3 hours on it. Don't torture yourself that way. And of course, the exam is not an open book test and not an open note test. Just make sure you're studied and ready to take it, and then go in and do your best. And the exam is due no later than 6:30 next Thursday. That's when exams end. So it has to be to me by 6:30 next Thursday. That's when I need all the exams in. And we'll talk about this again at the end. But that's how the exam works. You tell me when you want to take it, and I'll send it to you, and you'll send it back to me. Sounds like a pretty good deal. And there's not a lot of actual music talk I have prepared for today at all. I put the practice exam up for y'all, and I put the answers to the practice exam up. So there's really no reason to go over the entire exam. But I do think I'll pull up a little bit of the practice exam here, and we'll just give a few pointers and stuff. This is the first part of the practice exam, which is going to be exactly like the first part of the exam. I'm going to give you some chords and some keys and say write those chords and those keys, but don't use figure bass. But don't use key signatures. So you'll probably want to think about the key signature, but don't use it. And one thing to notice in looking at these chords here, notice that 3 of them are diatonic chords. A diatonic chord is recognizable to us at this point because it's a Roman numeral without a slash with another Roman numeral on the other side of it. If you notice, the first, second, and fourth chords are all just a Roman numeral and maybe some figured bass. But that third chord there is a Roman numeral and some figured bass, and then a slash and another Roman numeral. It's not a diatonic chord. But if it is a diatonic chord, the thing to remember is this. That means that every note in the chord is going to be in the key we're in. It's going to fit into the scale. So when I ask you for a 3-4-2 chord in the key of E flat major, remember that E flat major has 3 flats in the key signature: B flat, E flat, and A flat, and everything else is natural. And since that's a diatonic chord, it's only going to have those notes that would be part of E flat major in it. So if you look at what's going on there, you'll realize, yeah, all those notes would fit in the key of E flat major. They're all part of the E flat major scale. Same thing with that last chord at the right side there, the one that's in F sharp major. F sharp major has 6 sharps in the key signature, and when we're writing that chord in F sharp major there, you can see that all those notes that are in that 1-4-3 chord are notes that would be part of the F sharp major scale. The B minor chord that's in the key of B minor, the 7 diminished 6-5, B minor's key signature has F sharp and C sharp in it. And if you're looking at that chord, you'll notice that there's an A sharp in it as well that's not covered by the key signature. But remember that in B minor, sometimes when we're using harmonic minor and stuff, we like to raise the 7th note up from A to A sharp. So that A sharp is part of the key of B minor, or it is part of a B minor scale, even though it's not covered by the key signature. So all those are diatonic chords. And if you're asked to write just a Roman numeral and some figured bass, and there's no slash and another Roman numeral, you're writing a diatonic chord. So one way to make sure you're doing it right is to look and ask, so is everything in my chord within that scale? If the answer is yes, you're doing well. Look at that third chord. It's a chromatic chord, right? It's a secondary dominant, a 5-4-2 with 4 in the key of F sharp. Well, key of F sharp minor has F sharp and C sharp and G sharp in it. And if you look at that chord, you'll realize that not every note that's in the chord would be part of an F sharp minor scale. It's got that A sharp in it that's not part of F sharp minor. So it's a chromatic chord. And if you're writing a secondary dominant, you expect to see notes in it that wouldn't be part of the scale. You may be looking at these chords too and thinking, but when I did the practice exam, mine didn't look like this. It's okay if they don't look exactly like this, as long as you've got the right notes, like the right pitches. Like as long as your first chord's got, F and G and B flat and D in it, it's okay if you don't have it set up exactly like I've got that chord set up. The only thing that matters in all these is make sure that the bottom note in all your chords is the same as the bottom note on the ones in the slide right there. In the 3-4-2 chord, it's a G, B flat, D, F chord. The F has to be on the bottom since it says 4-2, and that means third inversion. But the G and the B flat and the D can be put in any register you want above them. It doesn't have to be stacked up the way I've got it stacked up there. And on this part of the exam, it's when I'm going to actually ask you to write some secondary dominants. And I'm going to ask you to use the key signature, so make sure you get your key signatures right. I'm not going to be impressed if you miss your key signatures. But secondary dominants are all chromatic chords, which means you should be able to look at them after you've done them. And then we have this part of the exam where I show you some secondary dominants and you have to figure out what they would be in a given key. So, I know this is a very low-tech presentation compared to what I do sometimes, but let me just talk through what's going on here. So, the way you do it is this. To figure out what the chord is, you want to figure out what its root is. So with that very first chord there that has C sharp, A, E, and G from the bottom up, you'd want to figure out how can you stack that chord as a root 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And the way to do it is to use A as the root, and then it goes A, which is the root, and C sharp, E, and G are the 3rd, 5th, and 7th, respectively. So we know that A is the root, and the other thing we know is it's a major minor 7th chord, so we're going to call it some sort of 5-7 chord. And it's got its 3rd in the bass, so we're going to call it 5-6-5. So it's a first inversion major minor 7th chord, and the root is A. So to figure out what it's 5-6-5 of, we need to figure out, well, when A is acting like the dominant, what's the tonic? What note does A tonicize? Whose dominant is A? So you think down a perfect fifth from A and you realize that's D. And in the key of C, D is the second note. So that's 5-6-5 of 2. And since in the key of C, the chord that we build on D is a minor chord, we write 5-6-5 of minor 2. In fact, in all major keys, the 2 chord is minor. And likewise, with that next one, when you see the notes, and it goes A, D sharp, F sharp, B, figure out what would be the root. The root is the B. It's B, D sharp, F sharp, A for that second chord. So it's in 3rd inversion, so it's a 4-2 chord. And it's a major minor 7th chord, so it's a 5-4-2 chord of something. And the way to figure out what the something is figure out, well, B is the root of this chord. So if B is the root of a chord, and it's acting like a dominant, if B is the dominant, what's a perfect fifth down from B? What's the tonic? That's E. And in the key of B major, E is the 4th note of the scale. And in major keys, the chord we build on the 4th note is a major chord. So we write 5-4-2 of major 4. And with the next one, it's a G, B, D, F chord in the key of A flat major. So that's 5-6-5 because B's on the bottom. And if G's the root and if G's the dominant, then it's the dominant to C. And C is the 3rd note in A flat major. And in major keys, the chord we spell on the third note is minor, so we call it 5, 6, 5 of minor 3. And the last chord in the line, in F sharp minor, unscramble it to figure out that the root is A. It's A, C sharp, E, G with the E in the bass, so it's a second inversion major minor 7th chord, so we're going to call it 5, 4, 3. And to figure out whose 5, 4, 3 it is, we're going to consider the root of the chord. The root of the chord's A. So when A is the dominant for what note? Down a perfect fifth. A is the dominant for D. And in the key of F sharp minor, D is the 6th note, and the chord we build is D, F sharp, A. It's a major chord, so we call it 5, 4, 3 of major 6. Now with all these chords, also notice that, since they're secondary dominants and have notes that aren't part of the scale, right, you can look and you can see each one of them, the note that makes it chromatic. You want to make sure that your chord symbols reflect that. You want to make sure that you're calling it 5 or 5, 7 of something, because that's what a secondary dominant is going to be labeled like. And let's look at this part writing in figure bass. I'm not going to go over it step by step by step, and of course I wouldn't expect everybody's to look exactly like this. I don't even know if mine would look exactly like this if I redid this exercise. But I want to talk about a few things that are worth noting. One is, of course, just remembering how figure bass works. Remember, it's all about intervals above bass notes. So in that second chord where you have 6 and 4 and 3, that means above that note in the bass, the C, you need a 6th and a 4th and a 3rd. And a 6th above a C is an A, and a 4th above a C would be that F sharp in the alto voice, and the 3rd above the C sharp in the bass would be the E in the tenor. And the other thing we need to do is notice that 6 has a plus sign next to it. And having a plus sign next to it's the same as having a slash through it or having a sharp sign next to it. It means we need to raise the 6th above the bass up a half step. So instead of writing just A, we write A sharp. Like in the second measure there, when there's a natural sign on the 7, that means we need to write a 7th above the D in the bass, and we need to put a natural sign on it. That's what that C natural is up there in the soprano voice. And if you look toward the end of the exercise, then we've got that 4-3 in the second to last chord. That's showing us a suspension. And remember that, the 4 means write a 4th above the bass note. The bass note's F sharp, so a 4th above F sharp is B. That's what's going on in soprano. And then the sharp sign off there with no number directly next to it. Remember, if there's not a number directly to the accidental, it means write that accidental on the 3rd above the bass note. So a 3rd above the F sharp in the bass is A. And we want to add a sharp to it, so that's what that A sharp in the soprano is. Just like in the last measure, there's B in the bass, and there's a sharp sign without a number next to it. So that means put that accidental, put a sharp on the 3rd above the bass, and that's what's going on in the alto voice there. The other thing you want to make sure of is that you watch the resolutions in your 7th chords. Some of these chords are 7th chords. For instance, the second chord in the first measure. The 4-3 that's part of the figure bass lets us know it's a second inversion 7th chord. It's an F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord. So that E in the tenor is a 7th. It needs to move down a step when it resolves. Likewise, on the second quarter note in the second measure, that C natural above the D is the 7th. It needs to move down a step to resolve. And in the third measure, there's an EGB chord, EGB-D chord, and the D in the tenor is a 7th that needs to resolve down a step. And going from the third measure to the last measure, that E in the alto is a 7th, and it needs to resolve down by a step. So that's one thing to watch for. Your part writing may not look exactly like this one, but the things that you definitely need to make sure are happening is make sure that the chord sevenths all resolve down by step. When you go from the second chord to the third chord, make sure that whichever voice has the E moves it down by step to the D. Sevenths have to resolve down by step. Some of y'all are forgetting that in the heat of battle when you're doing the homework. So you need to make sure that you remember that. Make your sevenths resolve down by step. That's the most crucial of the part writing rules. And here's the harmonic analysis, which I'm not going to go through bit by bit by bit, but there are a couple things I want to point out. When we're looking at those Roman numerals and figured bass, notice that two of the chords that are happening are secondary dominants. There's a 5-7 of 2 in the first full measure, and there's a 5-6-5 of 5 in the last measure. And when you look at both of those chords, if you look in the chord above the Roman numeral, you'll see that they're chromatic chords. The 5-7 of 2 is a G, B natural, D, F chord in the key of B flat major. It's got a B natural in it. That makes it chromatic. The 5-6-5 of 5 chord is a C, E, G, B flat chord. And that E natural that's in the lowest register is the thing that makes that a chromatic chord. So if you're looking at chords and they have notes in them that are not part of the scale or the key, you can't get by with calling it just some normal everyday Roman numeral. You're going to have to call it some sort of a secondary dominant. You're going to be calling it 5 or 5-7 of something. And if you don't call it that, you're not going to get it right. So if you're in the key of C major, for instance, and you see a D major chord, yes, D is the second note of the C major scale, and yes, that chord is major. Don't call it a major 2 chord. Call it a 5 of 5 chord. There is no such thing as a major 2 chord in most of the music out there. So when you see these chords that have chromatic pitches in them, don't think just any ordinary Roman numeral with a little figured bass is going to work. If the chord has chromatic chord tones in it, then it's going to need to be a Roman numeral and a slash with another Roman numeral on the other side that designates it as a secondary dominant. So make sure you're good to go on that. And of course, the other thing on this analysis that I would point out too is if you have a 6-4 chord show up, remember, of course, it's going to be a 1 or a 4 or a 5 chord that's in second inversion. Those are the only triads that are 6-4 chords. But if you have 6-4 chords, don't forget to label whether they're cadential or passing or whatever. That's an important part of it. If you don't do that, you haven't done everything you need to do. So tell whether the chords are cadential or passing if they're 6-4 chords or neighboring. And that's all I really want to pester you about the mechanics of the test. If you have specific questions, you can get in touch with me and I will be glad to answer them. But let's reiterate what's going on with the exam real quickly. Remember that when you decide you want to take the exam, you need to let me know in advance, well enough in advance, so I can email it to you. So you send me an email, sooner is better, letting me know when you want to take the exam, and I will email the exam to you. And once you receive the exam, you've got 24 hours to turn it back in to me. You're only going to need 2 or 3 hours for it, probably closer to 2. And it's absolutely due no later than 6:30 Thursday, May 14th. And then you'll be done with this semester of theory, and you'll be ready to go into next year's theory class. I guess the one thing I would offer by way of advice would be this. Don't forget any of this. None of what we learn in theory class really goes away. It's always out there waiting to come back and be useful to you at some point. So, make sure that you don't lose your grasp of what we've studied this year, especially this last stuff we've done with secondary dominants, because when we get back in chromatic harmony in the fall, we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to be talking about secondary dominants, and we're going to talk about a lot of other chromatic chords that are out there just waiting to meet you. So make sure that you understand this stuff we've done this year, especially the last things. If you don't, reach out to me over the summer, and I will help you get caught up so that you you will have an understanding of it. But you definitely want to know this for next fall in chromatic harmony. A lot of students tell me that chromatic harmony at the beginning of sophomore year is for them the most challenging of all 4 of the theory classes they take. So, it's neat. The stuff we learn in it is cool, and it happens in all the music we listen to. So if you want to be a musician, you need to know about it. But it does require some work to learn it. So make sure you don't forget anything we've done this year. We've done a lot this year. We've done some good work, and I want to build on that next year. This isn't necessarily how I pictured our semester ending. It's probably not how you pictured it ending either, but I'll be glad to have you all in class next year and see you face to face again. So until then, just stay healthy and stay happy and take good care of yourselves. And I will see you next fall, and we'll just sign off in the best way we know how here. Bye-bye.
Oh boy. When I wake up each day, I feel so weary. Try to face the world, but it's so dreary. But I found that special thing that makes me cheery. Time to do music theory.